This week we're welcoming horror games to the WonderSwan with Terrors. Terrors is a horror visual novel game developed by Megas, published by Bandai, and released on August 5th, 1999. This is also the first WonderSwan game to note on the box that it's recommended for use with headphones to help immerse yourself into the atmosphere. The freaky TV commercial for Terrors even goes as far as calling it 3D audio, but that's absolutely bullshit. Yes, the game's audio is very good at putting you into the right mood, save for a few bits that sound a bit crunched up due to the low bitrate, but there isn't anything here to warrant the usage of the term 3D audio. What makes this whole thing even more baffling is that it's hard to recommend players use headphones to experience the game when the WonderSwan hardware didn't even have a headphone jack. Yes, the WonderSwan led the way for future devices like the Game Boy Advance SP and the iPhone 7, which removed the headphone jack in favor of using an adapter, or in the case of the iPhone, Bluetooth. The WonderSwan had its own headphone adapter for the communication port, though nowadays this adapter can go for a pretty penny on the secondary market. This is why it's rather hard to find direct capture of unemulated audio from WonderSwan games in this day and age. Luckily, there was a first press limited edition of Terrors which also bundled the headphone adapter with the game, but only one other game recommending the use of headphones, Ring Infinity, had such a bundle. What's interesting about Terrors is just how modern it was for a handheld visual novel at the time. Just a year prior, in 1998, Chunsoft released Machi on the Sega Saturn. Machi is the first game to call itself a sound novel, or a variation on the traditional visual novel formula that de-emphasizes the game's visuals in favor of a more atmospheric audio presentation. Of course, Machi had a full 600MB CD-ROM to work with, but a year later, Terrors shipped a pretty impressive sound novel in a mere 4MB cartridge. Bandai interestingly didn't refer to Terrors as a sound novel in its promotion materials, but rather as a novel theater game. This formula proved to be rather successful for horror fans. Megas, the developer of Terrors, not only made Terrors 2 for the WonderSwan Color, but they would also be asked to make a novel theater adaptation of the Koji Suzuki 1998 horror film, Ring, which built atop the lessons that they had learned through the release of Terrors. Terrors has 6 different stories, 5 of which you can pick from in any order at the start of the game, and the 6th only unlocking once you've completed the first 5. Each of these stories has its own writer, producer, director, and illustrator, so they're treated less as chapters of a greater work and more of a collection of short plays, hence the name novel theater. Lengthwise, each of these take about 30 to 40 minutes to read if you're comfortable in Japanese. Much like an actual novel, Terrors is read in portrait orientation and with text that's read in columns from the right side of the screen to the left. The top third of the screen or so is used for the rather small art for the location you're in, but again, the sound is meant to be more of an emphasis than the visuals are. Despite that, I do have one complaint about Terrors' visual presentation, and that's how dark the game is. It's fine on an emulator, sure, but remember that the WonderSwan hardware was never backlit, so what we see as a white background here is whatever the neutral color of the display is on a real device. I personally find black text on a white background to be far more readable on an actual WonderSwan than the other way around, and readability feels like it should be a pretty high priority for a game where literally all you do is read. The art is also very dark, and if Castlevania Circle of the Moon taught us anything on the Game Boy Advance, it's that keeping things dark on a system that isn't backlit is kind of a bad idea. The obvious thing that's going to prevent me from recommending Terrors to a lot of you is that this is a game where all you do is read, and naturally all the text is in Japanese. There's no real getting around that fact. If you don't know Japanese, unless a fan translation comes out, you're not going to understand anything that's going on. That put aside, I do think that Terrors really nailed the visual novel format that works really well for Japanese horror on a handheld system. Japanese horror leans more heavily towards psychological horror than Western horror, and the game makes good use of atmospheric audio during moments of tension building to put you in a state of unrest. Please note that in a few episodes, I'll be doing another Q&A and errata episode, so if you have any questions, please leave them either in the YouTube comments or ask them on Twitter at WonderSwan Song.